Hey guys, this week's project is a little bit different than the dinosaur. I've got a friend that does a lot of knitting and like crochet and stuff, and they wanted me to 3D print them a sock knitting machine. So I've got all the parts here, all laid out. These are all of them, and they go together to make a sock knitting machine. Let's put it together. So this part here, I ran out of filament halfway through the print, so I ended up gluing the white one and the black one together, and then plastic welding it together. In here I've got a whole bunch of the little pieces and screws and stuff that I made. So there's going to be a link to these models in the description, so you can get them all. You got these two bearings that just go in this hole right here, one after each other. And then we have this gear, and we need to make sure that the chamfered side goes on the side facing this hole. That just goes like that. I made this piece. It's a bit different than the one in the instructions for it online. What I did here is I took a drill bit and I welded a washer and a nut on it, and that just slides into this hexagonal hole here. When you print this this piece here, make sure you use like a high infill. The same with the other gear piece. You want them to have both very high infills. And then on this side of it, if you look, there's a little hole right there. I made this piece out of a little bit of pipe. It's got a hole in it, and then around the outside is a wire that I bent, and the wire goes through this hole on the top, and it goes through and has a little pin. So the wire acts as a spring, and then this just slides over this, and you line up the two holes together, and it snaps in place, and that holds it in place. If you want to take this pin out, you just use a little flathead screwdriver. You just lift up the wire, and then you can slide the piece back off. It's better if you have two hands. It's hard holding this in one hand and working on it on the other. This is the handle that I made. Basically, there's a hex bit piece in there that I welded to another washer, and that just goes on this part like that. So you can, if it's jammed a bit and you need more pressure, you can use all your hand on all four of these bits to get a little more torque and a little more even. And if not, you can just turn it with the handle. That just comes off easy. Again, by using a drill bit, you can also attach a drill right to it, which I thought was a pretty nice little addition. Now, before we put anything else together, we have to get the needles in this piece. So I think this is the 72 piece variant, and basically what happens is you take this big round spring and it goes into this groove here, like so, and then you go through each needle and you can just push it in underneath the spring, like so, so that it slides, and this little bump comes out this side, and the hooks are orientated so that they face the outside of the machine. And I'll just quickly put those all in. Okay, that wasn't too bad. I figure it went a lot faster for you than for me. Right, so the next piece is this piece here and this piece. So this piece here has a rail inside that the needles run along, and then at this part here the ramp goes down. This ramp here goes down and it goes back up, and this part goes in. Yeah, it sits right on top of it, so when the needle comes across it floats above here until this ramp pushes it down to the bottom, and then this bottom ramp here pushes it back up to the top. And if the needle's coming from this side, it floats along here until it hits this ramp, which it pushes it down to the bottom, and then this ramp pushes it back up to the top. What I use for this is this screw, and it goes right into the nut that's on there. I guess it's a bolt, not a nut. With these 4 washers, just because I didn't have anything that gave me the proper length of screw or nut for this here, because you want to make sure that this doesn't stick out too much. Take this completely out now. I want 1 washer on it, at least. We can screw this on. See where it lands. And then I got the Sharpie here, so we can mark the screw here. Like so. Unscrew it, and then these holes in here, these wire cutters are threaded. I think this is an M4. Yeah, it's an M4. So we can just screw it in until we don't see any more Sharpie. So that's at that one there. So just tilt it back a little bit. That's the length that I want. So then we can just cut that right at the length that we need. And unscrew it, and it cut the end of the bolt off. So you don't have to do that with like an angle grinder or something that you'd normally do. Most people use an angle grinder or with a cutoff wheel to cut their bolts down, but you can just use some wire snippers. Look at that, perfectly flush right there. So this piece here goes on this right here. That just slides all the way up, and then to get all these needles down, oops, almost forgot. These 2 bits here, these are guides for the needles. So this one here with this downward slope goes on this left side through here, so that when it rotates down, it's resting, this angled part's resting on this down ramp, and this is exact opposite for this one, so well, the same, mirrored. That one sits on that one, and then this just slides in like that. And then you want to turn whichever way that it's rotating. So if it's, or the opposite side. So if it's if this wheel is rotating into this, you want to lift this one up. Actually, no, you don't. You want to push it down. Ah, silly me. Just pull a couple of these needles up to give it some room. Push it down so that the needles can ride on top. And then as you rotate, all these needles will go through that part of the track. You can just set those ones down, and as you continue to rotate, they'll move through the track properly. What you want is as these needles... Oh, I missed a needle. Oh, here it is. You can just sneak it in like that. There we go. So as these needles go around the track, this little wedge part here that I just put in pushes the needles up. So you get this upward swoop. And then there's a little part where they're loose. They just can wiggle. When there's string on it, the string or yarn on it, the yarn stops them from being able to wiggle. But right now, this one kind of fell down. But the string applies tension to them. And it stops them from moving. And then it hits this part of the ramp, which pushes them down. So they get pushed down here. And then when they hit the other side of the ramp that goes up, it pushes them back up. And then they all go back up. I will explain more how the knitting actually works when we get to that part in the assembly. So now I've got this spacer, and that just goes right on here. It's I put some grease on it. That's what this white stuff is. It's a little messy for me. Before we move to the next step, this ring, it needs to be attached. And in order to attach it, we need to put these pieces on it. So the first one is this one. This lovely angled little piece here attaches on it like this, just through those two holes in the bottom. So we can just screw that right on. I believe these are the two screws that I used. So these two. I think it's these two. And they just go in these two holes here on the bottom. And they tighten right up to this. And lucky for me, this part is also covered in this white lithium grease that I had. So hands will be nice and greasy. Now you don't want to over tighten it too much, but that seems like it was good. This piece here goes right on like this, and we'll just grab another bolt. Put a little washer on it, slide it through this hole, and then this bolt just screws right into this hole. Now the instructions on the web says that there should be a little nut on the end of this one, but I found that it doesn't really need it. It just screws right in. Like that. And that just holds it there. And then this last piece goes right on top. And that, I think I use this nut for. It's a bit bigger than the other ones. A lot of the hardware that I used for this is kind of just from my junk drawer. Everyone's got one, just full of nuts and bolts and random stuff. Okay, and that just goes together like this, and the yarn ends up going through this hole, and this is the hole that feeds it into the machine. And this here can be slipped on just like this, with this piece here, this black piece, lining up with this hole on this screw. If it's on either side, so this piece here, when it rotates, it hits that side of that white block, and when it rotates the other way, it hits this side of this white block, as you can see. It's kind of hard to see because the camera's white. There's a block right there. And it hits it on both sides. So you just want to make sure it's in between those two blocks. And then this whole piece can be mounted on like that. So you just flip this over. And I got these 4 more screws, or bolts. And each one's got a little washer. These washers are a little tiny for them, but I did manage to get them on, which is nice. I didn't want to make them too big because these holes kind of go right next to the hole in the bottom where the sock comes out, and that's I was afraid that they'd get snared if they were sticking out too much. There you go. Now on the instructions on this online, they want you to use a slightly smaller screw and put a nut and put a bolt. Sorry, the instructions online want you to use a slightly smaller bolt and put a nut inside. But I find that if you just oversize the bolts a little bit, you can just screw them right into the plastic, and that works fine. Whether you're using the nuts and bolts or just the bolts right into the plastic, you want to be careful not to over tighten it, because if you're just using bolts into plastic, you'll tear the plastic out, and if you're using the nuts, you'll drive the nut into the plastic, and that will mess with stuff as well. So you just, a little less than hand tight. If it starts to slip, you've gone too far, but normally you get a little bit of slippage, and then the plastic tends to bind up again before you tear the whole thing out. So it's a little forgiving. And then I made this. They want you to 3D print some stuff on the online one, but I figured that just a bit of a dowel that I shaped down and some wire that I hot glued. Basically the way this wire works is just an L-shaped piece of wire with a loop at the end, and another L-shaped piece of wire with a loop at the end, and then I bridged this with another piece of wire, glued it all together, and then just wrapped it in some electrical tape. This is a string guide, yarn guide, and that just sticks right into that hole right there, like so. You can go either way, left or right, depending on which way your string is. I'd like it this way. This one was built this way because this arm's a little longer, but if you made both arms the same length, it would work just fine. And you want it so that this bottom loop is about halfway in the middle. You want it pretty much centered in the middle of this, because what it does is it feeds the yarn to this piece, and as this piece rotates around, exactly where it lines up changes. So in the middle, keeps it as close as it can to all of it. Hoy. I looked everywhere for this, I couldn't find it. This is a yarn basket that I made. I soldered it out of some wire and, well, solder, and it basically just holds the strings. Here is the sock knitter, and here is some yarn. Basically what you do is you wrap it through this top one, and then through that one, and then it comes over here and through this hole. Now what I do is I tie a little loop on it, like so. And I attach that right to this yarn basket. And the yarn basket sits right here in the middle. And from this point forward, basically what you want to do is that in the same way that this travels, so this goes this way, you want to basically loop one around the needle, one around the basket, and the needle, and the basket, and a needle, and a basket. And then, depending on how many notches are in your basket, you move to the next notch in the basket. And you want to keep the basket sort of centered, but also you want to make sure that the strands are got some tension in them. And this is a pretty time-staking part of it. So I'll just fast forward until I've got all of the needles prepped. You just want to make sure that all these little flaps and the needles are down, because you won't be able to get the string on it on these ones that are below the edge of this. And one thing you'll notice as you get closer to the beginning, these ones kind of loosen up a bit. So, like right here, you can't see, but this strand on this side came loose. And that's just kind of the byproduct of slowly tensioning this thing, because as you add more and more loops, this wheel gets tighter, the string gets more and more tense on the side, and that pulls this machine up, the basket up, which isn't great for the ones on the far side here, but it's not a big problem, because by the time you get there, you're done. So right here, I'm done. So the whole basket has been all worked out. And then we have this big bag that I've got, and I've just got it full of rocks. And I just hang it right there. on the bottom hook for this tensioner. Now, basically what happens is each one of these hooks now has a loop of string on it that goes all the way around. And when the needle goes down, I'll get a needle, I'll show you. Okay, so each loop, or each needle has a loop on it, like so. And when the needle goes down, it pulls the string down, and then the needle goes up, the string slides down on it, like this. So now the string is below here, and then when the machine comes around again, it lays a new piece of string here on this hook part, and then when the needle gets pulled down through again, this flap moves up and it closes it off. So when this gets pulled through, now this loop is on the string, and then it gets pulled forward again, it gets pushed up, and that loop goes down here, and then a new piece of string gets laid on top, and again the needle gets pulled down like that. This one slips over this one, boom, through, and see how we're making loops? See how we've got these loops all put together? Well, that's what this machine does. It just puts a whole bunch of loops all the way around that are all interwound. It's not going up enough because both of these are in the wrong spot. That would explain a little bit. I need these to go up. So what the problem was is that I didn't have both of these little levers here, these little ramps, down. One of them has to be down, one of them has to be up. The one that it's going in the direction of has to be down. This one wasn't down, which meant that the hooks aren't going high enough. So I just push it over this little bit of a hole, and push the ramp down, and push the needles down, oops, on top of the ramp. Now the needles hold the ramp down. Now it's very messy. Now if we turn it, needles will be pushed up enough. That explains it. Okay. Silly me. Got a bit of binding on this side right here. As you can see, it's a lot messier than over here. That's just because we have a lot of loose threads that aren't doing anything besides getting in the way. So we'll just plop those on the other side because they're not doing anything. And this one here. And then we'll just apply a bit of tension to that. And there we go. So look at that. That's a good looking sock. You can look all the way down. And the only imperfection since I fixed that little problem was this little fluff here. And I think it's just a little fluff in the wool. I don't think it's an actual problem with the knit. Isn't that cool? And with all things in my life, I put the pro in procrastination because I wanted to put another video out like 2 weeks ago, and I'm like 4 months overdue on delivering this thing, at least. But it's getting delivered today because it finally works. A few tips if you're going to print this is make sure your tolerances are really good. Don't print the 72 tooth one or whatever it is first. Print the smaller one first. You'll thank me. Because each one of these little grooves needs to be sanded out if you don't print it right. If your tolerances aren't right. Or you have to reprint the whole thing. And the dumbass I am decided I'm just going to sand everything until it works. And that took probably like 50 hours of sanding and experimenting and making sure it works and taking the thing apart and putting it back together and reprinting things as they broke. These green parts, make sure your infills are high or else they'll break. This white gear piece, make sure its infill is high or it will break. Basically print everything at 100% infill if you can. I didn't print the base at 100% infill. I probably should have. It's kind of flimsy. As you see, when I was rotating on it, this thing was bending on every downstroke. But, you know, you learn as you go. And, yeah, I'm pretty happy with this. I'll take a little more footage of me making a sock. I don't know how to finish it. I don't know how to take it off this thing. I'm not a knitter. My friend's the knitter. She can figure out how to do it. But, yeah. Have a great day. Thank you for watching. And go make something.